What's up, everybody? This is Tanner from TanmanBaseballFan.com. I might be a few days late from this, but I'm sure what you've heard recently might have knocked your socks off a little bit, that there might be a lockout. Or there is a lockout. I'm not sure exactly how that works. But I do know a lot of people are probably a little worried about this upcoming baseball season. Now, because this is more of like a baseball card channel, I wanted to talk a little bit about how that might affect the actual baseball card market and the hobby in general. So we have a few examples in the past to draw from. And lockouts, by the way, they're not anything new. So the last one, from what I recall, that actually affected the season was 1994. And a lot of people point to that, of what happened back in 1994, as the downfall of the card hobby in general. And that may or may not be the case. It's probably had a little bit to do with it. But first of all, 1994 was an incredible year. So we had, I think it was Tony Gwynn. I think he was making a bid for 400, hitting 400 during the season. The Expos, if I remember correctly, were just on a tear. They had a great season as well. There are a few other things that were interesting also. I don't really recall. I'm trying to remember these off the top of my head, but 94 was like basically right at the time when I jumped off, and I didn't like draw a line in the sand and say, okay, I'm done with baseball cards. But I did, walk away from it for the most part, just because I was more interested in, girls and friends and, church activities and everything. So baseball cards kind of took a back seat. Now, it seemed like that there was almost like a mass exodus from the hobby from this point. And I would say that there's probably a couple of reasons for this. Number one, definitely the lockout probably had something to do with it. Number two, right around this time period, eBay came into play. So why would eBay have something to do with this? Well, let me give you an example. Before eBay, we were basically kind of really just stuck with the cards that we have and the cards that we see at the shops and the shows that we go to, right? When eBay opened it up, it became global basically. And we found out that our 1989 Donruss Ken Griffey Jr. rated rookie wasn't exactly all that rare, because you would have, 300 people that were selling them, and not just one, but quantities of 5, 10, 15, 20. So all of a sudden you have a Ken Griffey Jr. Ray rookie readily available to anybody at any point in time, and they had the pick of the litter, because there's just so many of them. So I think that's really when people started opening up their eyes to the fact that the junk wax era was called that for a reason, and we didn't call it that back then because we didn't really know. But millions of cards, like sometimes in some instances, millions of each card were being produced. So when you have a card, and that's just kind of how economics plays in, right? You have a 89 Donruss Ken Griffey Jr. rated rookie. It says in the book value is $8, but then you go to eBay and you see a bunch of them for $8. Then you see some for $6. You see some for $5, and you see some for $4. And that's really kind of how it plays out. People decided, okay, we're not going to place this at the book value. What we're going to do is we're going to place this to sell. And so that's what happened. And so it would kind of drive the prices down, especially in the past couple decades. I think more increasingly people have been looking at eBay for their sales data, which makes sense. I mean, because you could actually see what cards are literally selling for. So 94 is probably kind of a perfect storm, for the card market, really, just to kind of go down. Another thing that I thought was really interesting, this is basically just based on what I have found out when I've talked to various people throughout the hobby that, used to be in it as a kid. I would ask them, what made you leave the hobby? And almost every single person I talked to in the past, they said, there were just too many cards that were being printed out there. And so I don't know if that's really the case or not, but it's kind of funny because it gives you a look inside the mind of the average collector in the late 80s and early 90s. They were used to doing this collecting of Topps, Score, Fleer, Donruss, Upper Deck. And then they start coming out with Bowman and Leaf and Stadium Club and Ultra and Pinnacle and Studio, and the list went on and on and on. And that really started apparently wearing on people. So the habit of a collector from the late 80s and early 90s was really, for the most part, kind of trying to collect everything that was out there, their favorite player or their favorite team. And obviously, from I believe around the mid 80s or so on, things started getting a lot more interesting because you have Kmart, Toys R Us, uh, all these other different small companies that had these cards that were being put out as well, primarily from two companies, Topps and Fleer. They had all kinds of different box sets that they would offer throughout all of these little stores. And they're really cool cards, guys. Like, I love the Toys R Us cards. I think they're the coolest things ever. Same thing with these Fleer sets, the baseball MVPs, the hottest stars, all these. I think they're the coolest thing ever. And they're pretty cheap if you get them raw. So if they're graded like PSA 10 or something, that's a different story. But I think there's a lot of underrated cards in there. So anyways, as you go forward, you would go to the card shop, and like I said, you wouldn't just have the big four or whatever. And it's easy to pick up your favorite cards from four, but you now have a whole litany of different card companies out there that are making cards, or the same card companies are making different brands of cards. And so that's kind of what happened. But not only that, then the explosion of inserts and parallels came up, and so the people that had this mindset of gotta have it all realized they couldn't have it all. And so that kind of really, I think, shed away a lot of the people that were really in the hobby, at least according to them. That's what I've heard when I've talked to people about this. And I think it was just kind of like a shock wake up moment right there for a lot of people. They go, I can't do this anymore. I can't collect anymore. But the paradigm of collecting has shifted so much back, in 2021 now, that people are starting to realize that they got to think of it more as a buffet and not something that they're actually picking up every single card, because you simply can't. I think, if I remember correctly, I went to a website. It was maybe Cardboard Connection, because I think they've got this calendar of upcoming releases and past releases for each year and everything. And if I recall correctly, I think there were over 100 releases in 2021 when all said and done, which that's mind-blowing to me, guys. Like, especially when you take into consideration that every single one of those products probably has a plethora of one of ones. It's just it's gotten really crazy. So and there are a lot of people, a lot of collectors right now, even they hem and haw and they say, oh, it's terrible, there's so many cards out there that they're printing all the time. I get it. Okay, I understand. I completely understand. However, if you could, as a collector, step back and start thinking a little more of this as a buffet, and start picking and choosing what you like instead of this gotta have it all mentality, I think we all as collectors are going to be a lot more happy, content, thankful for this hobby here. So, going back full circle to this lockout. Let's say the lockout occurs to the point where there's no baseball being played. Let me give you a few scenarios. So first of all, 2020, we didn't have a whole lot of baseball being played. It's certainly not in the same way. It was just a weird season, right? But guess what happened to the cards? Now, certainly, it was a different time because, we were going through a pandemic. Everybody was at home with money to spend and that sort of thing. But that goes to show us that the card market does not solely hinge on baseball being played, and certainly not the same way. So that's one thing to think of. So what's going to happen possibly? I don't have a crystal ball. Nobody does. But there are a few things I could see playing out here. So number one, the card market could just go, and that's it. There, at least for the newer cards, and people just lose interest, because what happens a lot of times when you have no baseball being played, and this happens in the off season as well, because remember, it's all about attention, right? So when somebody's attention shifts from one thing to another, then the value goes up on the thing that has the attention that's on. So whether that be another sport or a different type of game or whatever. And so that happens in all sports, really. And so that's understandable. So there's a lot of worry and concern, I think, for a lot of people going like, well, if there's not much baseball being played in 2022, what's going to happen to my Trout cards, to my Acuna cards, to my Tatis cards, and all this? I understand, I get it. I think probably there's going to be, if there's a negative effect, if there's a negative effect, I think there's going to be more of that for the active players. Now, the older players, the further you cascade down, when you talk about Ken Griffey Jr., Frank Thomas, these guys that haven't played, I don't think they'll be affected nearly as much. Now, here's what I also think is going to happen. This is kind of my little prediction. Don't hold me to it, but here's what I think would happen. I think it's happened in the past a little bit before as well. Is all of this money is going into these new shiny cards, right? Well, I think what happens eventually, if this money stops going in here, I think people are going to start discovering vintage, and I think a lot more money is going to go into vintage. So this last auction house is Robert Edward Auctions. I was watching very closely because there's a number of examples that they had of pre-war stuff in their offerings I have in my collection I was watching. I was very pleased because a lot of the prices were extremely strong. I think that trend will continue. I can't write my name on that or anything because I don't know what's going to happen. Again, I've said this several times before. Pre-COVID, like early 2020, I thought the card market was going to collapse or at least significantly go down. I was wrong. It went the exact opposite. So I'm definitely not one person to make like a solid prediction saying, hey, you put all of your money in vintage and you'll be doing great. But to me, my thinking is that if there's a lot of people that are really hooked on cards, if they love baseball cards, if they love the hobby, if they love the sport, but they're not like putting in money into these new players, then I think that's going to cascade down into the vintage. And the vintage has been on tear recently, and with good reason. They're pieces of art, they're pieces of history. So I would personally look for a lot of the vintage stuff to go up. If a lockout happens, I think the vintage is going to go up anyways, but I think there's more money that would have been going into newer cards that might be shifted into the older stuff. So we'll see what happens. Nobody really knows, but that's my thought anyway. I would love to hear your thoughts as well. And let's keep our fingers crossed, for this next season. We don't want any games to be lost, and just really how kind of I don't want to say the word devastating, because devastating might not be the right word. But for Mike Trout, for instance, if I remember correctly, I don't think he played too much in 2020. Well, I guess not many people play a whole lot in 2020, but in 2021, he obviously didn't play a whole lot. And so like, what happens in 2022? I mean, that's a lot of time that he could have spent compiling some really monstrous numbers. And that's what everybody wants to see. We want to see him get to 5, 6, maybe 700 home runs at the end of his career. And so this is really putting a damper on it. So the people that pay attention to the game now, they'll always remember how amazing Mike Trout was. Well, Ted Williams, for instance, here's another example. He's probably top 5 player ever, maybe the best hitter in the game, best pure hitter. He was just phenomenal. But yeah, if I remember correctly, I think he ended up with 521 home runs, and I don't think he got to 3,000 hits. Let me take a look at this real quick. I'm going to pause this. Okay, yeah, I was right. He has 521 home runs. His career batting average was 344. And he had 2,654 hits. What a lot of people don't realize is he was in military service for 3 years, like prime years, 43, 44, and 45. If he had those years back, let me see what it says here. So before the 2 years before he went into military service, he hit 37 and 36 home runs. After, he hit 38 and 32 home runs. And so like he very well could have had at least 100 more home runs there. His hits, let me see, he was doing between 175 and 190 hits, it looks like, in that time period. So he could have easily made it in the 3,000 hit club. And I mean, his WAR, by the way, another is 122.1. So, a lot of people, if they just look at stats, they might look at Ted Williams and go, yeah, he was a good player. But when you really drill down and see, he wasn't just a really good player. He was a phenomenal player. He was absolutely insane on the diamond. And so, that's one of the things that I really am kind of bummed for these newer guys whenever we start seeing significant amounts of time being lost when it comes to the game itself. Because I love seeing these monster stats. Everybody loves seeing it, you know. So it's kind of a bummer when you have these people that that aren't able to play for, you know, a couple of years or whatever, the majority of the team. So my favorite player, Canseco, that was always the thing that was really you know, that really kind of bummed me out as well. There's so many years that he didn't play. Like, I think the vast majority of the years that he was playing, he didn't play full seasons really, because he was always hurt. So I have to check those stats on that also. But yeah, so you know, I guess I'm with everybody else. Obviously, we don't want to see a lockout happen to the point of where the season is affected. We want to see all 162 games, you know, so we'll kind of keep our fingers crossed on that. But like I said, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you agree with me, disagree, whatever, I would appreciate hearing from you. Please feel free to like and subscribe and hit the notification button on this as well. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.